Rolling right along on today's episode and into the second segment on Tua Tagovailoa. Recent reports have been swirling around the NFL that Tua is not expected to participate in the team practices starting next Monday. And up until this point, he has been absent for the majority of the volunteer workouts since they reported back on April 15th. And the majority thought around this whole situation over Tua's absence has been obviously because of the contract negotiations going on between his representatives and the Miami Dolphins. Currently, Tua is set to play 2024 on his fifth-year option. That is worth around $23 million on a one-year temporary sort of deal. The Dolphins picked it up last offseason. Obviously, over all the question marks and still uncertainty around Tua and his health, they picked that up right away. And this absence is sort of out of character for Tua. If you have followed or if you are a Miami Dolphins fan, you would know that in his 4 years there, he has been mostly present for these offseason workouts. And it's not like he's a grizzled veteran that just doesn't feel like he has to be there because of his body or anything like that. He's still obviously very young, and this just boils down to the contract negotiations. Not officially a holdout, but it is the start of one, potentially, if you want to call it that. And looking back on last season, Tua is coming off his best and healthiest season as a professional football player. He made the Pro Bowl for the first time. He played all 17 games for the Dolphins, which is huge, and also had a career high in passing yards, over 4,600, but also had 14 interceptions, which was tied for the fourth most in the NFL, right alongside Patrick Mahomes and Trevor Lawrence there as a reference. So, you have those numbers, but the biggest critique on Tua was his health. Was he able to play all of those games? He had a couple surgeries and injuries at the end of his college career, and then you had the concussions once he got into the NFL. And the Dolphins and a lot of people were really unsure on if he would ever be healthy enough to play that. He fixed that in the offseason, last offseason, and he came in really determined and more motivated than ever and sort of hushed the critics a little bit by playing all 17 games and not only playing them but performing very well. Early on, he was in those early whispers around the MVP conversation. Maybe not a true contender, but the way he was playing, the pace that he was on in the first 4 weeks of the NFL, he sort of got those looks a little bit, those nods into the MVP conversation. So I think that just shows his growth and maybe projecting into the future. That's a determination that the Dolphins have to make. Do they believe he can continue this on for consecutive seasons over and over again to be paid like some of the best quarterbacks in the NFL? Because if you look at the extensions that have just recently been dished out, none have reset the market, but Jared Goff just got an extension for $53 million per year. That's sort of I think, the threshold right now for very good performing quarterbacks. Anybody that resets the market has to be a very generational type of quarterback that is undoubtedly, no one is gonna really debate if they're a good quarterback. So like a CJ Stroud, maybe, obviously Patrick, Josh Allen as well. Those sort of quarterbacks, I think those are the ones that will reset the market. And Jared Goff didn't reset it, but he became the second highest paid quarterback in the NFL. Now Tua is sort of following him up in that path. Will he get that amount of money? That is yet to be determined. But the Miami Dolphins general manager, Chris Greer, pointed out right around the draft time that once the draft is past them now, obviously, that they're going to refocus on trying to get Tua that contract extension and take the contract negotiation discussions a bit more serious. And one of the main points he emphasized was that the goal is to have Tua there for the long term. So it seems like it's trending in the right direction. There hasn't been any inclination that, this deal is far from getting done, but it just keeps on getting pushed back more and more. And now Tua's not going to show up to the volunteer practices. So it is developing, but maybe not in the way that maybe a lot of Dolphins fans would want it to develop. But also with that, I mentioned the durability before. Now putting that past them a little bit. And how the Dolphins sort of determined this extension with him. It is funny and something worth noting that all the talks are about the extension. All the talks are about how much money he could make now that he's on his fifth-year option. But the Dolphins still have that franchise tag option available to them for 2025. If they really can't come to terms with Tua and figuring out a number that they like, they could franchise tag him for the 2025 season. But the downside to that is it will cost them about $40 million or more in 2025 for that 1 year temporary deal. So again, there are some risks, there are some benefits keeping him around a lot longer to really determine if he's your guy. So there's good and bad with that, but it is another option that they have. But also, the question now arises about the other players that the Dolphins have to worry about on potential extensions or expiring contracts. They already picked up the 5th-year options on their star pass rusher, Jalen Phillips, who was having a great year last year before he tore his Achilles, and also their superstar wide receiver, Jalen Waddle, also had his 5th-year option picked up on his deal, and another great player on their defense, Jevon Holland, is in the final year of his rookie deal, and because he was a second-round pick, he doesn't have that luxury 5th-year option that the Dolphins can pick up. So he's playing now in the last year of his rookie deal. So that's 3 starters right there that the Dolphins also have to keep in the back of their mind to potentially extend. And there is just decisions to be made right now. It's not like they're pushed up against the clock here, but it's similar to, I guess, the Cowboys in a sense that they have these guys that are in need of extension, and you don't want to push it back too far where you're now scrambling to determine who you sacrifice or anything like that. But say Tua Tagovailoa goes further into this mini holdout, he starts not showing up into training camp. That obviously has a fine to go along with it, but a sort of good sign that is based off of that report of being fined for missing training camp practice. Sources close to the Miami Dolphins said that the fine for missing training camp practices is about $40,000, but that could be reduced or waived altogether for Tua Tagovailoa by the Miami Dolphins. So the fact that they're willing to reduce it or just completely wipe it away from Tua, I think is a good sign to show that they really want him around. If they didn't, they would have no problem fining him and no problem sort of having this mindset of not caring if he's not at training camp. They obviously want him to be there, and not finding him, I think, pushes him more in a positive light that, hey, these guys are doing me a favor. They obviously want me around. And I truly believe that they want him to stay, but extending him does come with some benefits, and also something I think the Dolphins have to keep in mind just based off of this offseason as well, is that by extending Tua, obviously it would reduce his salary cap hit, and so Miami would have more room to work on other deals like the ones I mentioned before with Jalen Phillips and Jalen Waddle and Jevon Holland. If they come to a contract extension with Tua, they'll have more wiggle room there with the salary cap, and also this past offseason is a great example of what could happen, of what they'd have to maybe deal with if they don't figure out their cap situation by extending Tua. They lost their star pass rusher Christian Wilkins and one of their best offensive linemen in Robert Hunt because they were pushed up against the salary cap, so you don't want to keep on making those cuts. By extending Tua, kind of a factor, not against, in favor of Tua re-signing would be that it would create that more salary cap space for the Dolphins, so that's a positive. And also, say that they don't extend Tua first, there are some factors that come along with that. Say they extend Jalen Waddle, maybe Jalen Phillips first, or Jevon Holland because he doesn't have a 5th-year option. I think that'll be a very telling sign if the Dolphins were to extend all these other players before their starting quarterback. I think that would say a lot in how they're truly feeling about this extension, on how the development of this is going. If they feel like it's going in a good direction or a bad direction, we'll get to know if they start extending these guys before Tua. That's something to keep in mind. And also, I mentioned the extensions to other quarterbacks. Tua is part of this mini group alongside Dak, Trevor Lawrence, and also Jordan Love a little bit, but he's not extension eligible, or he just became extension eligible. He's not on the final year of his contract yet, but he is also eligible for an extension. So those 3 to 4 guys, are the next sort of wave up, and you have the Cowboys, the Dolphins, and the Jaguars sort of trying to jump on top of each other trying to get these extensions done first, obviously to save some money and not have their quarterback try and reset the market if they're the last ones to get extended. That's something else to monitor, how all those teams play off of each other as well. And I mentioned Goff before and how he got $53 million per year. Based on the success, Jared Goff has had more success, but just quarterback to quarterback, talent wise, arm ability, athleticism, is Jared Goff, that much better in terms of money than Tua? I mean, I have my doubts a little bit. I would probably still take Jared Goff, but the discrepancy in how much money they get per year, I don't think it would be that much, just based on the circumstances as well. It really just comes down to the amount of money that the Dolphins and Tua can compromise at, the risk of losing him in free agency next season if you don't franchise tag him, or the year after that, and also, would you be willing to cough up $40 million if you place the franchise tag on Tua with still having the risk of losing him the year after that? If, say, he doesn't play well at all on that franchise tag, you would have wasted $40 million and that franchise tag on Tua and still moved on from him. All these are factors that the Dolphins have to think about. Do they trust Tua to continue this level of play going forward in his career? I think for right now, they don't have to extend him right now in the next 2 months. I think if they wait maybe into the season and then announce it after the bye week or halfway through the year, I think would probably be the most ideal time to buy them those extra weeks to really see if Tua can be that guy for them. You can't wait too long. Obviously, I wouldn't put it off until next season, but if it were me, I would wait a little bit into the season, and if I'm impressed again, if he gets off to another hot start, I would probably pull the trigger and extend him. Now, the money, he would probably have to fall somewhere between 51 and that $54 million mark, around what Jared Goff got. That's just the circumstance with the quarterbacks now. Again, if Tua plays well to start off the year next year, I think it'll merit that. Some people will have their doubts, about Tua still, how his arm talent compares to Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers in that division, but that's just how the market works. That's just the circumstances these teams find themselves in, and it'll be interesting to see going forward into the season, but in the meantime, we'll move on with the rest of the show. A few more topics to talk about on today's episode. We're going to go over the international games as well as the Thanksgiving and Black Friday games, plus what the NFL Vice President of Broadcasting said about the Jets and why they got so many primetime games in the first 12 weeks of the NFL season. Stick around to find out more on those topics. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.